The family of Murrays is crucial to the Mimic saga, but thanks to the way the story was given to us, this family is not without a controversy. At first I wanted just to make a usual video where I'm breaking down the characters and call it a day, but there is a problem. We were shown two different versions of Murrays. We can not only break them down, but also compare them. And I must put a disclaimer here. Before anyone will say how Tales from the Pizzaplex is just a blueprint of general ideas, and how Secret of the Mimic is not supposed to be an adaptation of the story The Mimic, I don't care. If the story establishes something for almost 2 years and then decides not to go with the established material, then I don't see a reason to hold punches. Well, now let's see how Secret of the Mimic has adapted Murrays. There's clearly no bias in this video, I swear. So where all the problems come from? The first ever introduction of Murrays happens in Tales from the Pizzaplex, a pretty important part of the lore that was laying background for the events of Security Breach and even Help Wanted 1. Edwin Murray first appeared in the Storyteller, and then him and David Murray appeared in The Mimic. However, to introduce The Mimic as a villain to a broader audience, a game about his origins was required. The Storyteller was hinting that some part of the story was missing, and The Mimic had an ending where Edwin was disappearing, leaving plenty of room for another story. When Secret of the Mimic trailer was out and Edwin was name-dropped in it, it became clear that Murrays are indeed an important part of the story and not just throwaway book characters. However, from the trailer it was speculated that the game won't be about the story The Mimic, and won't be about Edwin Murray's warehouse where he lived. So the first assumption was that it would be set a bit after. Little did we know. As turned out on the release, Secret of the Mimic was barely using Tales at all. Some basic concepts were carried over, but the family of Murrays was changed. Hence why we now have two interpretations of them, one from Tales and one that is an adaptation for the games. Let's begin with what was left the same when adapting them. For starters, in both cases Edwin was working on orders for Fazbear Entertainment, and in both cases he is the creator of the Mimic. In both stories Fiona ends up dead, which leads to Edwin slowly losing his marbles and losing David in the process, which leads to him beating up the Mimic and disappearing. In both stories Fazbear Entertainment sent out recovery teams after the Mimic, and that went very wrong. That's basically all the important similarities you will find. The stories have the same ideas and spin them differently, but the devil is in details, and the details turn these two versions of Murrays into completely different families. Starting with David. Tales David was a very restless child, with a lot of artistic talents. He loved to draw, he was coming up with a sign language to describe things around him to the Mimic, and he was sharing with the Mimic his talents and his love for the world. In Tales, David was Mimic's teacher and friend. David got used to the warehouse their family lived in, and he was always exposed to costumes, machinery and old tech. So when Edwin first showed him the Mimic, David was more than eager to see what his new friend can do, and basically they became friends from the get-go. At first the Mimic was copying David because he was programmed to copy everything he sees, but apparently later he began to gain some sort of consciousness, to the surprise of Edwin. Still, there was no goal to turn the Mimic into David. Mimic was supposed to be David's friend, and so he was. Tales also makes a heavy emphasis on how David was distracting Edwin from his job, and it was crucial for Edwin to continue working for Fazbear, to be able to make any sort of fine life for David. This was heavily restricting David's and Edwin's relationship, but when they had time together, they can clearly be seen as a happy family. However, this balancing between the necessary work and caring for David leads to David's death, after he ran out on the road. This broke Edwin and he lashed out at the Mimic, who was still copying David's gestures. Since the importance of David and Mimic to each other was clear, it was suspected that the reasons behind Mimic's obsession with Gregory was Gregory's general similarity to David. In this story we see that David had both character, plot relevance, and was a catalyst for some of the future events. Now, what does David has in Secret of the Mimic? What, you see nothing? Well, I wonder what that means. Okay, it's an exaggeration. David has a little bit, but it's very minuscule compared to Tales David. Yes, we see a bit of happy family on several birthday tapes, but we barely know anything about David's character or interests, even after searching his room. Remember how Tales David loved to draw or creating a sign language for the Mimic. Well, we can guess that this David also loves to draw, but with the same luck, these drawings could have been made by the mimic himself. Remember the dynamic between Edwin and David. Remember David's restlessness and energy. Forget that as well. The only instance of any interesting interactions between them are the moments when Edwin tries to comfort David after Fiona's death and when he presents the mimic to David. Speaking of that, remember how David was eager to meet the mimic and how he quickly befriended him. It was a very character-defining moment for David, as Edwin was afraid that David would be scared of Mimic's appearance, but David was only excited. Forget that as well, because in Secret of the Mimic, David is scared.
David, I want to introduce you to someone. This is M1.
Why does it look like that?
Look like what?
It's scary.
You could say that this is because the Mimic indeed looks scary, but in Tales, Mimic arguably looked even worse, due to the lack of resources at Edwin's disposal. Other important character traits, like his creativity or quick learning, are also weren't shown. Even David's death was changed, to the point that it's never even said how he died or if he died at all, and it is suspected that it happened because of Edwin's negligence, but we will talk about it later. This uncertainty gave rise to some funny theories, like William Afton kidnapping David. Very funny stuff is happening here. We can assume that Mimic Fiona and David had some sort of close family relationship, by again drawings of David and the Mimic that are spread around the building, and by Mimic Fiona baking a cake. However, M2, the Mimic we have in Ruin, was created after David's death. While M2 is mentioned to be a copy of M1, it is unknown if he has the same memories. Maybe you could say that the moon there shows us that M2 knows David, but I wouldn't count on that vague minigame. Even if M2 has the same memories, this doesn't change that David has no connection with him. So not only the Mimic was forced to be David in this version of events, but he and David never knew each other personally. And it's just another important thing in the story that was almost completely lost. In the secret ending, we see how Mimic is afraid to copy David after Edwin's rage, which was never the case in Tales. Blindly copying David is not the same as being David's friend. There is also a matter of the White Tiger, who was David's plushie. Tales never showed any sort of ghost of David, and later in the timeline Mimic was using this tiger plushie as a reference for his AR avatar, Tiger Rock. But in Secret of the Mimic, it seems that David became some sort of a ghost, or whatever is going on with these hallucinations and the White Tiger running around in the basement. The worst thing here is that this White Tiger has mechanical footsteps, which already has led to a belief that it could be the Mimic, and that the Mimic could be possessed by David, which goes against everything Tales was establishing, and against Mimic's character in general. So here I will just hope that it will remain a theory and something that we will never get an answer for. We are done with David, and as we can see, Secret of the Mimic already changed a lot about him, and left some questions that weren't supposed to exist. Now we will have an easier topic, and that is Fiona. In Tales, Fiona has died before the events of the book began, but her death haunts Edwin. He met Fiona in school and they married after graduating. He bought the abandoned lace factory for his business and Fiona liked it. She wanted to make yards and yards and yards of luscious window coverings out of it. Edwin never understood why Fiona loved him, and she always jokingly told him that it's all because of his mustache. Still, Edwin was glad that David was more like Fiona than Edwin. There is nothing else in Tales about Fiona, so Secret of the Mimic basically had a carte blanche when adapting her. Well, aside from the fact that she is not supposed to be alive here, but we are long past that, and Fiona was the best part of Secret of the Mimic, so who am I to complain? In Secret of the Mimic, Fiona and Edwin met each other only at work at MCM and not at school. This change doesn't really matter, although you could argue that Tales Fiona could have had a deeper connection with Edwin, but that sounds like nitpicking. After Edwin's father died, Fiona was a positive drive for him and for all workers in the factory. This can be seen in the tapes that were recorded to help the personnel repair the elevator, and in how she was reassuring Edwin when he was doubting himself.
Ed, honey, how are you holding up? I just heard the news.
I don't know. This is all so much. He's gone. He's gone, and now everyone is asking me what to do, and I don't know anything. I can't run a company. I'm not ready. I can't fill his shoes. He knew it. Everyone knew it. The company is going to collapse and they're all going to hate me.
Ed, you'll figure it out. Just take a deep breath. It's your company now. Your dad believed in you. Otherwise, he wouldn't have left it to you.
She was also very worried about the safety of springlock suits, and it is most likely that Fiona was the one behind the Employee Appreciation Project.
It's called the Employee Appreciation Project. Every employee, regardless of position, will have their own office space to decorate and enjoy on their breaks. All of you work so hard, and we want you to be happy. Keep it to yourselves for now until we're able to make a full company announcement.
So Fiona clearly cared about the lives of usual people, and because she was a co-owner of the company, it definitely had a positive effect on the state of things. After all, there is a reason why in the Moon Exe she is the sun. She was also not very keen of Edwin sometimes missing David's birthdays. Fiona dies in a fire at Fall Fest, where she went because she had a gut feeling that she is needed there. The decline of the company begins with her death. Anything else we know about Fiona can be put to doubt, because it's not really Fiona, but M1. How Mimic came to the idea of copying Fiona is uncertain. It could be that he just overheard birthday tapes, or it could be that some part of Fiona's soul latched onto him. Mimic Fiona is very obsessed with caring for David. It's almost like it's the only quality M1 has learned. Although Mimic Fiona sends to Edwin the idea of Cradle Exe, to protect the people from M2. David's death is such a mystery that some theorize Mimic Fiona could be behind it. The only way to make this work is if Mimic Fiona wanted David to be a child forever, otherwise it will contradict to her obsession. Mimic Fiona doesn't hold herself back and sometimes roasts Arnold.
Now it's your turn to play dress up. When he catches you, which one will he choose? Who are you deep down inside? Another worker bee? A bumbling bee? Perhaps a busy bee? In many ways tonight has been a comedy of errors. A jester would suit you well. Or a bunny, running from danger, scared and stupid, searching for a hole to hide in. No, you did everything I asked up to this point. You were an obedient dog, a good dog.
I doubt real Fiona would do anything like that. And that's basically it. Since Fiona had barely any presence in Tales, there wasn't much to adapt, so there wasn't much to butcher either. But now we've got to Edwin, and... The changes to Edwin were done in such a severe way that I struggled to gather my mind on where to start. And because Edwin was my favorite character in Tales, this is gonna be a spicy part of the video. Let's set the ground with Tales. In Tales, Edwin was shown as an initially successful inventor. He was together with Fiona since school, married her after the graduation, after which he struck success by creating CO.AG. However, a series of unfortunate events has hit him, with Fiona dying giving birth to David, and with CO.AG sales declining. Because of the spending they did while they were rich, this left him a lone father with barely any money for a living. But despite the circumstances, he managed to pull it through the challenge for quite a long time, about 4-5 years. The pressure was getting to him, and this is evident from the way he snapped at David several times. One time even shaking David a little bit. Anger was clearly building up in him, but ultimately he felt guilty afterwards and they were quick to call peace. He was trying his best, and was sacrificing a lot of his sleep time to have more time with David when he could, like taking David out for ice cream, because working on the costumes for Fazbear was eating a lot of time. He didn't like working for them, and he suspected that he made a mistake, but he had no choice. He made the mimic so David would have a friend, and so David would stop distracting Edwin's work, which was crucial to keep them afloat. Unfortunately, this was not enough, and one time because Edwin had an argument with David, he had to carry David to bed, and later Edwin fell asleep right next to it. When David woke up, Edwin was barely waking up due to their little squabble and his work the day before, so he didn't thought much when David said he will go play and wait for Edwin. Edwin thought Mimic would keep David occupied, and he went to the shower first. But after that he realized that the front door is open. After one moment of Edwin's weakness, David runs out onto the road and is killed by a van. This broke Edwin, and for 2 weeks he lived in an automatic mode, without remembering what he was doing. When he finally came back to his senses a little bit, he saw how Mimic was copying David's sign for ice cream, And this is the point where Edwin finally gave way to his anger, beating the mimic to a near death and infusing him with agony.
Edwin's hand closed over a length of metal. Sharp-edged and cold, the metal was heavy. The weight of it felt good in Edwin's hand. So did lifting it, so did bringing it down on the animatronic's head. Howling like a wild animal, Edwin battered Mimic over and over and over with the metal rod. Metal sparked against metal. The reverberation of each blow bounced up Edwin's arm, sending jabs of pain into his shoulder. But Edwin didn't care. He only cared about destroying Mimic, pulverizing the only real thing that Edwin could attack in an effort to annihilate his pain. Edwin pummeled Mimic again and again and again. He battered the animatronic's head, thrashed at his chest, and lashed at his arms. Edwin was destroying his creation, but he didn't care. For 2 weeks, Edwin had been lost in a void of despair, and now his despair had turned to rage. He had to get it out somehow, or it would consume him, because Edwin knew, even as he continued to scream and foam at the mouth, that the real object of his anger was himself, and that infuriated him even more. He wanted to destroy himself, but he couldn't. So he sublimated his wrath onto the Mimic with an intensity he hadn't known he had in him. He lost control of his humanity. He was devolving into the primitive version of himself, into something ferocious and savage. He could almost feel his murderous thoughts pouring through his muscles and transfusing through the metal into Mimic's system. Edwin wasn't sure how long he wailed on the Mimic before he finally ran out of strength, and he ran out of anger. Edwin's legs went out from under him. He collapsed to the ground and stared at the remains of his creation, the remains of his son's friend. Mimic, though not completely destroyed, was now a pathetic picture of total defeat. At some point during Edwin's assault, Mimic had toppled over, and he now lay, arms bent, in one last tragic copy of Edwin's little boy. Edwin dropped his head into his hand. His anger dissolved into regret, and the regret brought tears that he thought just might flow forever.
After losing control, Edwin is clearly regretful of what he has done and runs away from everything. Many years later in The Storyteller, Edwin is one of the members of Fazbear Entertainment board, but he is there only because his company was bought out by Fazbear Entertainment many years before that. Edwin wasn't very popular there, and he didn't like this position. In his own words, he was there more like a mascot. Sometimes he liked to think that at least he is not the boldest member of the board, which he admitted was childish, but he had to deal with the reality best he could. Edwin was furious when the lead member of the board suggested to cut the Pizzaplex losses on the creative team. Edwin was a grounded person, and he knew that this will affect the quality of art. When Edwin found out that the board leader, Mr. Burrows, hides the details of the Storyteller's programming, he starts to suspect that something shady could be happening, and he sees the confirmation of this in the way the animatronics were changing in the Pizzaplex. Doing a sort of investigation, he found out that the Storyteller uses the Mimic program as its base, and tries to save this place from something that he already witnessed before, something that gave him horrific flashbacks. And it wasn't about David's death, it was something about the Mimic going rogue. He snuck inside the Storyteller, but he failed to fix his past mistakes. Mr. Burrows trapped him. Edwin died inside the Storyteller, asking the Mimic for forgiveness. A sorrowful, unsuccessful attempt at redemption. So what could go wrong in Secret of the Mimic? Let's begin with the most obvious and hilarious. Edwin's mustache. Yes, I'm serious. Characters often have visual traits that can define them, or that can be associated with them. Be it an accessory, hairstyle, color scheme, and what else. For some examples, Gregory has 2 bandages. One on his cheek, one on his knee. Such simple detail fits his background of an orphan and his rebellious nature. Cassie has green nails, a noticeable visual cue that serves as an indicative of her desire to be recognized by others and her being a fan of Roxanne Wolf. Freddy Fazbear always has a bow tie and a cylinder hat. It's basically his symbols as the main star of the franchise. Monty has a red mohawk and star glasses. Red is an aggressive color, and star glasses are often being associated with ego, stars in his eyes if you will. I think you can see what I'm getting at. Edwin's mustache was just as important. So what does he look in Secret of the Mimic? Pardon my French, but he looks... how do you say it? Weak. This one change is a good showcase of what has been done to his character in general. In this story, Edwin wasn't strong enough to start a business on his own. He gets it through inheritance. His work still makes him to sometimes neglect David, despite him not having that good of a reason as Tails Edwin.
You're missing it.
Just give me a minute. I had the best idea.
Okay, well,
This is the one. Bigger than the Cleanovac.
that's great, honey, but you're missing the party.
David's 2 years old. He won't remember a thing.
That's not the point. We have guests.
Besides, he's got plenty more birthdays. Next year will be even better.
He is very creative, but his creativity makes him forget about everything else. That doesn't mean that Edwin in Secret of the Mimic didn't have good family moments, but they are very sparse. In Tails, Edwin was neglecting David when he had no choice. In Secret of the Mimic, Edwin neglects David because he has too much of a choice, putting off taking care of David until another day. Edwin still works for Fazbear, and he is suspicious here of them as well, but the way it is voice acted makes him sound like a complete paranoic.
Edwin, never forget. They're behind it. Don't trust them. Never tell them. They want to destroy you. Dad was right.
In Tails, Edwin felt unique, because he wasn't your usual corporate guy. However, in Secret of the Mimic, Edwin's business has basically no difference from Fazbear or any other corporate company.
I have great news, admins. Say hello to Dolly. Now that the Dolly system is up and running, you can stop collecting time cards. She can work an unlimited number of hours without breaks or mealtime, always with a smile on her face. Dolly also can't be injured or need a sick day. Just imagine the money we'll save. You can begin laying off the sorting staff as more Dolly tracks are installed throughout the lower levels.
What about the talent? Well, we removed the talent.
We don't know the way Edwin proposed to Fiona in Tails, but it definitely wasn't the way he did it in Secret of the Mimic, where he didn't have the gut to do it personally and instead did it through a recording. It's adorable, but only in a vacuum. Fiona dies at Fall Fest, and it is a turning point for Edwin in Secret of the Mimic, as the company begins to decline after her death. However, the way it is voice acted is just horrific, and doesn't sound like Edwin is going through a tragedy at all.
Oh, why did you go? You weren't even supposed to be there. You were supposed to be here with me and David. Oh, how am I supposed to tell David that his mother is gone? How am I supposed to raise a kid on my own? His life is ruined. My life is ruined.
It is unclear if Edwin has built the Mimic right before Fiona died or sometime after. However, here Edwin has built the Mimic with the function to wear costumes of his company, making an implication that the Mimic was first a business product and not a babysitter, even if Edwin mentions that Mimic can do that as well. Mimic starts copying Fiona, and this mentally messes Edwin up. In Tails, Edwin's way of coping with Fiona's death was his work. It was very taxing on his mental health, he had a lot of doubts, but he was still managing to put himself together. Meanwhile, in Secret of the Mimic, Edwin's way of coping with Fiona's death was making the Mimic to copy her. Dude, what have Scott done to my boy? Edwin later shows even more neglect that most likely has led to David's death.
Look, I get your concerns, I do, but they're all just groundless. This is the perfect spot for David's playground. I can watch him play while I'm loading and unloading freight, and he'll be under watch at all times out there. The loading dock is like 200 feet away, and there's a fence and everything. I know you're my lawyer and all, but there's no regulation that says I can't have it there, so just get off my back. Besides, David loves the new slide. It'll be fine.
It's important to mention that Tails also had a similar moment, but it felt much less important, as the warehouse wasn't as dangerous, and Edwin was a much more serious guy. How David died is unclear. Mimic Fiona tries to persuade Edwin to make M2, and it appears that Edwin finally had a moment of realization.
For the last time, no, it wouldn't be him. Oh, who am I kidding? You're not really you. I've been so stupid.
Edwin, calm down and give it some thought. Try again. Make another, and we can all be together.
All this time wasted? I should have been having fun with him, playing games and teaching him how to make things. But I didn't. You, I let a machine raise my kid. You're not real. What was I thinking?
You do not mean that. It is me. I'm Fiona.
Stop talking like her. You're not her. I never want to hear or even think about you ever again. Ever!
But later he budges and starts to work on M2, attempting to recreate David. When someone leaks to Fazbear Entertainment that Edwin is working on the Mimic, he has the most childish reaction ever. Tales Edwin could never imagine.
Attention traders, admin wing permissions have been revoked. And no, you can't clear out your desks. You stole my work. Now your jackets, purses, and coffee mugs, and anything else belongs to me. Maybe I'll go find someone to sell your stuff to. How does that feel?
Later Edwin apparently recognizes his mistake, because we jump from him creating M2 to him beating him. And yet again, one of the most powerful moments in Tales is completely fumbled both from the way it was written and the way it was voice acted.
Stop. Not him. You're not. Stop sounding like him.
Fiona tries to convince Edwin to repair M2, but he doesn't budge, and hides inside his manor, abandoning everything and everyone in the factory. The most selfish and pathetic thing he could do in this situation. And sure, you could say that he did the same in Tales, but in Tales Edwin abandons only an empty warehouse. Meanwhile, in Secret of the Mimic, it looks like Edwin abandons everyone who was working for him, and this most likely has led to even more deaths from the Mimic, without counting the recovery teams of Fazbear Entertainment. Fiona sends him a message begging him to at least make a cradle exam to contain the Mimic, and Edwin does it. He successfully created it, but he failed to activate it after the explosion caused by the Mimic. In Tales, in the last hours of his life, Edwin was asking the Mimic for forgiveness, and because of how Edwin was portrayed in Tales and how the events were written, it is easy to believe that Edwin there was genuine. However, in Secret of the Mimic, Edwin tells the Mimic that he is sorry and begs the Mimic for help. He begs, and it sounds like he is sorry only because he needs help.
M2, respond. Emergency. Call for help.
Daddy's busy, buddy. Why don't you go outside and play?
Please. I can't move. I can't feel my legs. I'm sorry, M2. I lost my temper. I was always gonna fix you. Please, call for help. M2, respond.
The Mimic hits Edwin with all the neglect Edwin has shown to him before, and that is a possible death of Edwin in the games. Edwin's death is of course unconfirmed. Secret of the Mimic wasn't shy when it came to showing dead bodies, and Edwin's body is nowhere to be found. He can come back. Be it a different version of events with the storyteller before security breach, or something after ruin, when he is old. A recent update of Secret of the Mimic added a ghost figure that can be seen in the office, so maybe Edwin was still around and left the place alive. But honestly, if this Edwin won't come back, that's whatever. Damn, what a tiresome journey it was. And what do we have in this adaptation in the end? That's just my opinion, but we have a character who was mischaracterized and put aside, a character who wasn't supposed to be here the way she is, and a character who was turned into a weak shell of his former self, whose good character traits were mostly taken away, while the negative traits were amplified 3 times. Now with this new version of Murray's and some changes to the circumstances of Mimic's creation, some parts of Tales need a rewrite, and the timeline is much messier than before. Fiona and Mimic Fiona are definitely bright spots in this story, but the rest? Of course you could say that the way Edwin behaves in the storyteller could be the progression of his character after Secret of the Mimic. But what was the point? What was the point of changing Murray's identities? Even if Scott regrets killing Edwin in the storyteller and needs him for something after Ruin, and regrets not giving Fiona a proper role, most of the changes still won't make sense. It almost feels like this story deliberately avoids Tails and makes mockery out of it. But I think I had enough of this pain for today. Thank you for watching. Press like and subscribe if you liked this video, watch another one if you want to. Good luck and I'll see you again soon.